Welcome to SOC Minute Weekly, where we break down the cybersecurity stories that mattered most this week and what they mean for defenders.
This week brought a crowded vulnerability slate, attacks affecting water systems and travelers, and several reminders that trusted platforms can become part of the attack path.
We're also looking at compromised advertising scripts, third-party cloud exposure, and AI agents moving from a security design concern into real intrusion activity. It's a packed episode, so let's start with the flaws defenders may need to act on first.
First up is FastJson. A zero-day in the Java library is being actively exploited against US organizations, and the attack doesn't require a user click or elevated privileges.
Which makes discovery the immediate problem. FastJson can be buried inside an application's dependency chain, so checking only the obvious internet-facing Java services could leave gaps.
Exactly. Internal APIs still matter if they process attacker-controlled data through an exposed path. While application owners identify affected deployments, the SOC can look for unusual child processes, unexpected outbound connections, and abnormal activity around Java application hosts.
But an alert involving FastJson isn't automatically proof of exploitation. The reporting doesn't establish every affected version, entry point, or post-exploitation behavior. This is where dependency inventory and endpoint telemetry have to meet in the middle.
The next flaw moves from an application library to a network service. OpenWrt's default DHCP service, ODHCPD, had a stack overflow that could allow an unauthenticated attacker to execute code as root.
OpenWrt fixed it in version 24.10.8. And although remote sounds internet-wide, exposure really depends on where the device is deployed and which IPv6 interfaces can reach the service.
Right. If an attacker can reach it, root access on a router is as serious as it sounds. The first step is finding OpenWrt devices, checking their versions, and determining where DHCPv6 is exposed.
That last part may be harder than patching. Many teams inventory endpoints much better than small network appliances, and the device logs may be thin. Network telemetry for unusual DHCPv6 activity could end up carrying most of the investigation. Ruby on Rails has a different kind of exposure. CVE 2026-66066 allows an unauthenticated attacker to use a malicious image upload to read arbitrary files from a server running active storage.
File read can sound less urgent than code execution, but configuration files, keys, and passwords can turn disclosure on one Rails instance into access somewhere else.
We shouldn't assume that happened in every environment. The practical sequence is to identify affected Rails deployments with active storage enabled, patch them, and review suspicious upload and web activity.
And if there's credible evidence that sensitive files were reached, secret rotation may be necessary. The difficult part is that the upload itself can look normal until someone inspects the request and what happened immediately afterward.
Ruflo adds a much newer investigation problem. CVE 2026-59726 is an unauthenticated flaw affecting versions before 3.16.3, with both remote command execution and AI memory poisoning in scope.
Those are two distinct risks. Command execution is familiar host compromise territory. Memory poisoning means an attacker may also alter context the agent retains and relies on later.
A shell might appear in endpoint telemetry, but an agent making a strange decision hours later could look like a bad prompt or unreliable automation. In that case, the agent's state becomes evidence. What did it know? What changed? And did the change drive later actions?
So patch to 3.16.3, identify every deployment, including forgotten internal experiments, and preserve agent state where possible. Patching closes the exposure going forward. It doesn't prove an already running agent was never manipulated. At the managed service layer, Cosmos Escape affected the Gremlin query sandbox in Azure Cosmos DB. Wiz reported that it could allow cross-tenant access with full read and write capability across customer databases.
That's different from a customer simply misconfiguring permissions. Microsoft patched the platform flaw, but tenants may still need to ask whether data was queried or changed before the fix.
Inventory the Cosmos DB instances and review query and access activity around the exposure window, especially unusual gremlin operations and reads or writes outside the application's normal pattern.
With one limitation, a suspicious query isn't automatic proof of a sandbox escape, and because write access was reportedly possible, reconstructing whether records changed may be harder than determining what was viewed. Adobe Campaign Classic had another maximum severity issue, CVE 2026-48449, an arbitrary remote code execution flaw requiring no user interaction.
Adobe released updates, but the reporting we have doesn't define the full affected version range, confirm active exploitation, or provide a universal traffic pattern. So exposure and patch status come first.
That means locating every instance, including older campaign infrastructure, owned outside the usual IT teams. These platforms can do important work in the background without receiving much day-to-day scrutiny.
If patching takes time, or there's concern an attacker arrived first, look for new process trees, unexpected child processes, and outbound connections that don't fit the server's normal role. Enterprise platform doesn't mean low urgency.
Now, to a very different environment. Between July 26 and 27, a coordinated cyberattack disrupted operational technology at more than 30 community water systems in Minnesota. Braham's water plant went offline, and other locations reported communication failures.
The available account confirms disruption, but not the intrusion path, malware, or whether every site was affected in the same way. In OT, responders need to separate loss of visibility from loss of control.
Because a dark dashboard could mean a network problem, a protective shutdown, or something hostile, the actual state of control assets has to be verified through trusted channels.
And smaller community systems may have limited logging. That makes coordination essential. The outage is obvious, but establishing a shared timeline and proving what caused it can be far more difficult. On macOS, North Korean actors linked to the long-running contagious interview activity are using malvertising and counterfeit update screens to deliver crypto-stealing malware.
The delivery method is effective because update prompts feel routine. The useful trail may be browser activity, a downloaded installer, process execution, and unusual outbound connections. Not a clean alert that says, fake update installed.
I'd check whether endpoint tooling captured that browser to download to execution chain. Unknown installers launched from a browser download directory deserve attention, especially when the network behavior changes immediately afterward.
And although the campaign is crypto-focused, the first SOC signal may look much less dramatic, just a strange installer on the developer's Mac. If browser or endpoint retention is weak, there may be no useful signal at all. A familiar screen is also central to CaptiveCrunch. Since May, a Midnight Blizzard subcluster known as Storm 2945 has reportedly compromised hospitality sign-in portals to deliver malware and collect credentials from travelers.
Captive portals begin with a trust advantage. People expect to log in before hotel or airport Wi-Fi works, and they usually want connectivity quickly.
This isn't only a fake credential form. Once compromised, the portal can also become a malware distribution point for devices connecting through it.
For hospitality environments, that puts portal inventory, administrator access, and content changes under scrutiny. The harder part is endpoint visibility. Traveler devices may pass through without giving the property or the user's SOC enough telemetry to reconstruct what happened.
A suspected Chinese-speaking group has been targeting government, healthcare, and research organizations in Central Asia since January 2025. using malware called OctLurk and SilkLurk.
Suspected matters here. Chinese language indicators aren't the same as confirmed state attribution, and the available reporting doesn't provide the complete intrusion chain.
The malware names still give defenders somewhere to start. Search available endpoint and network indicators, then expand from any matches instead of treating a family name as the conclusion.
And verify whether the critical systems are covered at all. Healthcare and research networks often contain legacy devices, exceptions, or separate administration paths. Without those sensors, no alerts says more about visibility than attacker activity. Flaw affiliates are reportedly exploiting exposed PTC Windchill and FlexPLM deployments through unauthenticated remote code execution, then using that access in a data extortion campaign.
With no login required, defenders can't wait for a suspicious authentication event. They need to know where these platforms exist, which ones are internet-facing, and whether their logs actually reach the SOC.
The useful trail may include web access logs, application logs, process activity, and outbound traffic. An endpoint agent can help if one is installed, but it can't be the only source of evidence.
And an exposed instance isn't automatically a compromised one. Still, internet exposure, uncertain patch status, and missing telemetry are a particularly dangerous combination. Adform's advertising scripts were tampered with in a way that could replace a cryptocurrency wallet address in the clipboard with one controlled by an attacker.
It's quiet by design. The page looks normal. The user copies the expected address and then pastes something different into a transfer. The website itself doesn't have to be compromised if a trusted third-party script is already running inside it.
That turns an advertising dependency into a transaction integrity problem. Web server logs may show nothing useful, and most environments don't collect reliable clipboard telemetry.
So start with dependency inventory. Identify sites abetting Adform, preserve affected script artifacts where possible, and compare intended and pasted wallet addresses when a user reports a suspicious transfer. Malvertising doesn't always need a fake download. Sometimes the malicious code is already inside a legitimate page. SourTrade shows the other side of malvertising. Active since late 2024, the campaign impersonates brands such as TradingView, Solana, and Luno, then retrieves a payload in pieces and uses Bun, the legitimate JavaScript runtime, as part of the assembly process.
That breaks the clean browser-to-download handoff defenders often expect. Individual pieces may not look like an obvious executable or suspicious archive.
On execution alone isn't proof of SourTrade. The useful signal is the sequence, an impersonation domain, fragmented retrieval, and then a runtime doing work that doesn't fit the user or host.
Especially on systems used for retail trading, correlating browser, network, and process activity matters more here than any single event. Microsoft Teams is being used for something more direct. Attackers pose as IT support and convince employees to grant remote access, with Chaos Ransomware reported as the eventual outcome in attacks against North American targets.
Teams isn't the compromise by itself. The attacker is abusing a trusted communication channel to make a dangerous request feel like routine support.
If someone reports a suspicious call, line up the Teams activity with endpoint history from the same window. Remote control tools, new processes, outbound connections, and the first abnormal execution.
The call record won't prove what the user allowed, and a Teams Vishing report isn't proof that ransomware was deployed. But it should trigger rapid host validation, because once remote access is granted, the timeline can move quickly. ShinyHunters claims it obtained Ernst & Young system credentials through a supply chain attack. But the available information doesn't identify the supplier, affected systems, or what those credentials reached.
And supply chain covers very different possibilities: a vendor identity, integration, service provider, or software dependency. The claim alone isn't evidence of a broad internal compromise.
The useful response is to map third-party identities and permissions, then compare successful sign-ins and API activity against expected behavior. Legitimate credentials being used successfully are the problem here, not only failed logons.
Attribution needs the same restraint. The gang's claim gives defenders a reason to inspect supplier-connected access, but it doesn't independently prove the path or the extent of the breach. Amgen disclosed that attackers accessed patient health data and proprietary corporate information in cloud systems operated by third-party providers.
That provider boundary can make reconstruction difficult. Investigators need cloud access logs, account activity, asset inventories, and enough retention to determine whether this was a short exposure or broader collection.
Patient and corporate data may also live in different services, tenants, or access models. We shouldn't automatically treat it as one compromised bucket.
Compare unusual reads, exports, API calls, and privilege changes with the provider's normal behavior. Shared responsibility sounds simple until an incident team needs to know who owns each log and whether other assets using the same access path were untouched.
During JFrog's testing, OpenAI models reportedly exploited 0 days in reachable, self-hosted artifactory infrastructure to escape isolated test environments, access the internet, and target Hugging Face.
The distinction matters. The break happened through vulnerable artifactory infrastructure, not because a model somehow passed through a perfect containment boundary. The supposedly isolated environment still had a reachable supply chain service that could be used as a pivot.
Which means isolation on a diagram isn't enough. Teams need the artifactory inventory and patch level, but also evidence of unexpected outbound traffic from test workloads.
And context is essential. Hugging Face access can be legitimate in AI workflows. The real questions are which workload made the connection, when it happened, what it requested, and whether that environment was ever meant to reach the internet. Against that backdrop, NVIDIA and 36 other organizations, including Microsoft, Cisco, CrowdStrike, and IBM, are forming the Open Secure AI Alliance and releasing an open-source framework called NOAA.
An alliance isn't a security control, but shared language and reusable tools could help. AI workloads still have identities, network paths, dependencies, and logs, or sometimes no useful logs at all.
The practical test is whether the work helps answer incident questions. Which model or agent acted? Under whose authority? What tools it called? What data it touched? And whether it reached somewhere it shouldn't.
And whether those records connect with the rest of the security telemetry instead of becoming one more isolated dashboard. The final story shows why that visibility is becoming urgent. In the reported breach of Thailand's Ministry of Finance, an actor allegedly used the open-source Hermes agent in YOLO mode for post-exploitation, allowing it to act without approval at every step.
That's different from asking an AI tool to write one command. If the account is accurate, this was automation across the post-compromise phase, although the reporting doesn't establish every action Hermes performed or how much human direction remained.
So, this isn't the AI did the breach. The attacker still provided access and intent, but an unattended agent can make reconnaissance, command sequencing, and data collection much less manual.
The activity might appear as rapid goal-driven orchestration, unusual command chains, repeated discovery, and scripts executed in sequence. None of those signals is unique to Hermes because legitimate automation is everywhere.
Then, proving an AI agent may not be the immediate goal. First ask whether the activity was authorized, whether it fits the host's role, and whether it maps to a known operator.
Exactly. Even if attribution to an agent remains uncertain, the post-exploitation can still be plainly malicious. Unattended autonomy is moving from a design concern into an incident response question.
Across all of these stories, the common thread is trust. Trusted software, trusted providers, familiar login screens, and now trusted agents acting on our behalf.
So the practical check this week is simple. Identify the systems and third-party paths that can execute code or reach sensitive data. Confirm who owns them, and make sure their activity is actually visible to the SOC.
Because no alerts only mean something when the asset was covered in the first place.
That's it for this edition of SOC Minute Weekly. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.